All right, now we are. Thank you, Judy. Hooray. Oh, good. Virginia Senadella's joined us. So we're getting them. There's some more.
There should be more.
Yes, yeah, there, I'm keeping my eye. If I look weird at the side, it's because I'm watching for new people. Any rate, I just started recording thanks to Judy, which I thought we were, and she reminded me to check. So, and Michael had just started briefly, so I'm going to backtrack to wherever you think you ought to, and we'll go forward.
I might just go forward. What I'm saying, Virginia, welcome.
Yay.
I'm just saying that I'm going to be talking about 3 different books, 3 projects I've worked on. One of them's a work of fiction, the other is a work of narrative history, and the one that'll be out this summer is biography. So I've been in and out of a lot of sandboxes here, and they've all been pretty interesting. Some of you might have read my one and only novel under the alluring title, The Pattersons. You can have a show of hands if you've read that one, but don't be embarrassed if you haven't. That and self-published it simply because I had a story to tell. No great designs. Other than that, I had a story inside that I needed to tell. So this is not really the business part of this talk. This is more the art. Here's the backstory, and this is going to sound like quite a rabbit hole, but when I get out of it, you'll understand why I have to do this. For my dissertation in sociology, I chose a topic and a methodology that I think Mr. Jefferson would have approved of wholeheartedly over UVA. It was an observant participant study of cowboy sports and the resonance of frontier and Western themes in contemporary society. So here's what I did. This went on for a couple of years. I would haul my horses to a cowboy sport competition, either penning or sorting, kind of work on horseback. And like Margaret Mead in the deepest, darkest jungles of New Guinea, I waded into my subculture of old Dominion cowboys with a pad in my shirt pocket and a tape recorder in my horse trailer so that I could slip off and make field notes. So that's what I did. It was more fun than should be allowed. They say dissertations are no fun. This one really was. And then I was spending my weeks in the libraries at UVA doing all the bookwork behind it. When you got your first photograph that went with the first announcement to this email, showing Judy and me on horseback, that was a picture of us giving each other a big old high five because we successfully cut some cows out of a herd. We kept a small herd of cattle out in Nelson County. And I used them to practice on. Some people go to the golf tee or whatever. Well, I don't. And then we also did it as an investment. Like writing fiction, investing in a small herd of cows is not a good investment. So I don't recommend it, but it is fun. So the point is, some German publisher was trolling for dissertations and theses to publish. They found mine. Europeans really like cowboys. So this German publisher published it in the picture that you saw in that email. Judy's son, Jason Bourne, taking some pictures for that book, and it came out under the title Inventing Tradition, Cowboy Sports in a Postmodern Age. Now I get to literature. So I had that book out in the world. And I decided I wanted to explore those same themes, Western tropes and frontier themes. I wanted to explore those in contemporary society. And I wanted to take what I call America's 51st state of mind, the Wild West. It comes up from Star Wars to you name it. It's a theme that is consistent in our culture. I wanted to see how that would play out in the descendants of a frontier entrepreneur who built his empire in the post-Civil War Great Plains. So in other words, I decided I wanted to explore my imagination, what I'd already explored in sociology, in history, and on horseback. So that's what I did. Practically speaking, and this kind of gets at the business of it, I was teaching 2 courses at UVA at the time. So I developed a routine, which is really key, of working at home. Judy was undergoing chemo and radiation for cancer, which is the most god-awful thing you can think of, but it did keep me at home, and it did afford an opportunity to do something with my time. Might as well write a book. I also have about a 10-year background in book publishing. I was founded and president of a book publishing house in Tulsa for about 10 years. So all these things combined put me in a place where I thought maybe I could pull this thing off, basically. All right, that's the backstory. I'll begin this book with an epigraph. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. William Butler Yeats in The Second Coming. So the main character in this book is a fellow named Marshall Patterson, a principal with his rather unprincipled brother in an oil and gas dynasty, Bluestone Resources, based in Wichita, Kansas. This you might find kind of curious. I didn't know how to write this book from Marshall's perspective, so I had to tell the whole story through his wife, Ellen. Ellen and Marshall have 2 kids, teenagers, Daniel and Chloe. So who's this guy, Marshall? Marshall is what I call a reluctant executive. Early on, a series of events and an injury push him from a career as an English teacher and aspiring university professor into his family business. And that is the last place he wants to be. So how does he cope? Well, he drinks too much, and he spends his summers not in the office in Wichita, but at the Patterson's estate in a mythical town called Birchwood Bay, Wisconsin, where he sails his yacht and drinks and doesn't work. So you can tell he's kind of on a downhill slide. Trouble arrives in Birchwood Bay when Marshall's brother decides to develop a natural gas field in Cross Timber Village, a Chippewa community where the Birchwood Bay elite find their waiters and their gardeners and their mechanics. So now that you have some background, I'm going to give you my first rule of writing, which is totally unoriginal, but completely necessary. And that is you write what you know. Sounds kind of obvious. So this book was never autobiographical, which I had to explain to people who've known me for a long time. It's not an autobiography, but my pioneer ancestors began building their businesses, which was banking, in the Oklahoma Territory in the 1890s. My hometown, Oklahoma City, is 2.5 hours south of Wichita. My family's been involved in oil and gas, cattle ranching, and banking. I've spent a lot of idyllic summers in a real place called Harbor Springs, Michigan, and Judy's joined me on a few raucous sailboat trips. And guess how Marshall got hurt? Back to fiction. He was riding an arena working cattle. So in other words, a lot of themes in my own life play into this. Our reading comes when when Ellen and her children on their way to a Chippewa powwow. And they discover to their astonishment that Bluestone Resources is about to develop a natural gas field right near the ceremonial grounds, which will destroy the Native American community. So this is reading 1 from the Pattersons. No sooner did Ellen, Daniel, and Chloe start down the path to the Chippewa ceremonial grounds than the forest canopy closed in. As their eyes adjusted to the eerie midday twilight, their ears were assailed by a rising din. Rhythmic chants, punctuated by emotion-packed wailing, grew louder with each step. Pine needles and sawdust strewn along the path made for easy walking. but did nothing to prevent them from stumbling on roots that snaked across the path. If anything, the soft footing simply made their trek more treacherous. Suddenly, they were bathed in sunlight and they emerged into a clearing. Although they were certainly closing in on the powwow, they had begun to feel lost in the forest primeval, and now, with no warning, they were in the open, flanked by trees that seemed to reach to the sky. "Look, guys, the trail starts up over there," said Daniel, pointing to the far side of the clearing. A flash of light registered in Chloe's peripheral vision. Unaccustomed to the sunshine, she had to wait several seconds for her eyes to adjust. While her mother and brother were marching steadfastly across the meadow and toward the opening in the woods, Chloe stayed behind. Gingerly, she stepped in the direction of whatever it was that had attracted her attention. Head lowered, she cursed her Birkenstocks for their lack of support in the sandy soil. She lowered herself down an embankment and into a clearing that was twice the size of the one that her mother and Daniel were traversing. When she reached level ground, she raised her head. What she saw took her breath away. She wheeled and scrambled back up the embankment, just in time to see her fellow pilgrims disappearing into the woods. "Mom, Daniel, get over here now!" Sounds from the powwow were flooding the clearing. Ellen and Daniel were almost to the spot where the trail resumed. "Mom!" Chloe was screaming now. She waved a bandana to attract their attention. "Chloe?" Ellen suddenly realized that her daughter was missing. She turned to face the clearing. In any other circumstance, she would have laughed out loud. 100 yards away, a teenager with pink hair and a red bandana was jumping up and down and shouting. Bile rose in Ellen's throat, and for an instant, she was speechless. Then she regained enough composure to shout, "Come on, Daniel, something's wrong with Chloe." But Daniel was already on the case, loping on his long legs through the meadow and hollering to his sister that help was on the way. Ellen did her best to keep up. When she caught up with her children, they were mute, breathing hard and staring down into the other clearing at industrial equipment secured behind a chain link fence. Just below a no trespassing sign was a poster bearing a familiar logo and the simple wording, Blue Stem Resources, Inc., Wichita, Kansas. So my next literary ventures originated with people I'd known some of most of my life, and for whatever reason were confident that I could pull off a book-length manuscript. I had a few published journal articles out by then and graduate degree from UVA, so the stars seemed to be lining up and maybe I'd get lucky, okay? Here was some of my luck, which you kind of make, which is another thing about these ventures, you kind of make your own luck. But a friend of mine who's executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society recommended me to write a combination family and corporate history for a bank founder and chairman. That turned into an awesome project and took me back to the 18th century Pennsylvania frontier, so we'll leave that alone for now. About the same time, that same friend put me on the Oklahoma State payroll, which I'm probably the only Virginian on there, to help prepare for a major museum exhibit on the state's commercial history. And he wanted me specifically to look into banks because he kind of knew my background or family background. Never been a banker, never wanted to, but I knew something about it. I veered off course, told him, "Bob, there's a book in there and I want to do that." So he gave me his blessing to go off and write a 2-volume history of Oklahoma banking. The point is, it turned out I could be a rainmaker in my hometown. In 2010, Judy and I bought a townhouse in Northwest Oak City. I do my research there, online and in the UVA libraries, and write mainly right here on Ridgetop Drive. So it all works out. as I was working on the 2-volume history, I got another contract, met a terrific guy, he's CEO of Bank First Corporation, which is a ginormous multi-bank holding company. Wound up writing a book for him. So the question is, did I set my sights on being a bank and commerce historian? Good Lord, no. Who would want to do that? But I found that there's no better way to get to the heart of a community than through its banks. Small towns, all roads lead to the local. I mean, that's where dreams come true. Loans get made, or they used to, a lot anyway. So I really have enjoyed it and been real fortunate to do all that. Which leads me to the next book I'm going to read from. Skipped all those bank history books. We'll move right on to the next one. This is a book under the title, I don't know if you can see that, 1889. The Boomer Movement, the Land Run, and Early Oklahoma City. This book grew out of a job too. So the deal was, I was reviewing the Pattersons at a bookstore in Oak City, and one of the attendees, a real estate developer named Chuck Wiggin, introduced himself. It turned out everybody and his dog knew him but me, so we got to be friends. He invited me to lunch. And he said that he had a dream of developing a walking trail in downtown Oak City to commemorate the run of 1889, which I'll be explaining here in a minute, the state's foundation story. He'd read my previous work. There come the referrals. I just reviewed the Pattersons, so he knew I could crank out fiction. Anyway, he wanted me to gather historical vignettes, forage for old pictures, and put signs all over town. So I said, great, we come up with a contract, had more funds should be allowed, gathering all that. As I neared completion of the signage, I went to Chuck and I said, Chuck, I'm not done with this. There's a book in there, and I'm going to string all this together in a coherent narrative. I'm going to write a book. So he said, will you do that? I will find a manufacturer for our signs. I'll find a graphic designer. I'll wade through the city permitting process, which sounded to me like a complete nightmare. He did all that, and I went off and did my thing. Turned the manuscript into the University of Oklahoma Press. They'd done 2 of my previous books, and so they were enthused about this one. And it came out in late 2018 under that title. So here's what you need to know before my reading. This is just your little history lesson. Sorry about that, but you got to get into the feel for this thing. Let's see a show of hands if you saw Far and Away. Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, their hands are going up. The very end of the movie was about these Irish people down and out that made a land run into the old Oklahoma territory, and that's really the way it worked. You get on your horse or your bicycle or your buggy, and you ran for land and planted your stake. A ridiculous way to start a state, but that's what they did. What you learn from that movie is a lot of Oklahoma, the western part, was founded just that way in land runs. And most people in my home state have no clue that the run of April 22nd, 1889, which was into the Oklahoma City metro area, what that became, was preceded by a contentious, decade-long, and sometimes fatal movement to open central Indian territory to convince the federal government to open up those millions of acres to non-Indian settlement. It was a decade-long battle between the haves and the have-nots. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's been around a long time. The scene I'm going to read for you comes from a WPA interview in the late 1930s with a guy named George Hawes. George Hawes was a freight train conductor, engineer, who delivered freight in the late 1880s along the north-south Santa Fe line that went through depots that eventually blossomed into the Oklahoma City metro. The scene I'm going to read depicts his experience the night before the run. So this is April 21 of 1889, which I will now entertain you with. That evening, freight train conductor George Hawes was traveling north on the Santa Fe when he experienced engine trouble. He pulled over at Guthrie and wound there staying most of the night to fix it. There were a few soldiers and deputy marshals around the depot, recalled Hawes. Nobody else in sight, but we were told the Blackjacks a half-mile east of the depot in the timber along the cottonwood was thick with Sooners. At the time Hawes recorded his memories in the late 1930s, Sooner had long since muscled its way into Oklahoma vernacular. And as the generations passed and lived memories of the state's origins faded into myth, the label came to symbolize Oklahomans' pride in a pioneer heritage, loved to celebrate, but only dimly understood. Homegrown businesses adopted the term to brand their products and services as a surefire way to bring Oklahomans into the door and onto their rosters of satisfied customers. Most famously, it became identified with one of the state's leading universities in its uber competitive sports teams. In an increasingly mediated and sports-saturated world, everyone knew that the University of Oklahoma Sooners were, are, and maybe forever will be worthy competitors. All that was far in the future as farmers and businessmen and women set their sights on the sprawling grasslands and promising town sites of Oklahoma proper as the end game entered its final hours on that Sunday night in April. People who were playing by the rules knew two things. They were the rightful owners of the nation's dwindling supply of public lands, and Sooners were getting there first. Okay, the last reading I have for you is a biography. And it's the title of it is kind of sexy, really. It's At War with Corruption, a biography of Bill Price, U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Oklahoma. I don't have a cover to show you because I actually just shipped the book off to a graphic designer in Tulsa yesterday. Friday. So it's in design, it'll be out later this summer. So here again, I wrote this book under a contract. This was under a contract that began with a philanthropic organization in Oklahoma City. And by the time I started this one in late 2018, opinion leaders in around there knew there was an expat living in Charlottesville who could be lured into their projects. At War with Corruption depends heavily on recorded interviews. I've done, I don't know how many interviews, dozens of interviews. I've hauled Judy to more corners of that state than anybody I've ever known, interviewing folks. At any rate, I depend heavily on interviews with the subject of this biography, former U.S. Attorney Bill Price, his family, a bunch of lawyers, former governor, former state attorney general, a sitting congressman, and even a former FBI agent. So I have been wallowing in corruption, or at least people who have spent their careers wallowing in corruption, whatever. My reading comes from the preface of the book. And this preface will tell you all you need to know about where this project came from. And as an aside, and now that you know something of my nefarious past, I was actually driving home from Nelson County working my horse, and I was parked in the Harris Teeter parking lot when my phone rang with a familiar 405 area code. And I said, oh, that's somebody in OKC, I better take it. And you'll hear about that in a minute. So this is reading 3, very beginning of the preface from At War with Corruption. At War with Corruption began, as many books do, in a conversation between friends. In this case, those friends were the subject of this biography, Bill Price, and Bob Ross, president and CEO of the Inasmuch Foundation in Oklahoma City. Long before they conceived this book, Bill and Bob belonged to various boards of directors. and civic organizations that summoned them to meetings throughout their native state of Oklahoma. To pass their windshield time, Bill regaled his friends with tales of his tenure in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oklahoma City in his hard-fought political campaigns for governor in 1990 and Congress in 1992. Many of those tales were about the Oklahoma County Commissioner scandal of the 1970s and early 1980s, which rocked state governance to its core, spawned the most extensive public corruption case in FBI history, and dominated Bill's 15-year tenure as a federal prosecutor. Before he retired from his law career and for many years thereafter, Bill spearheaded philanthropic projects that turned his retirement into something other than retirement, and these too became fodder for conversation during their cross-state travels. There's no telling where they were when Bob posed the inevitable suggestion. Bill, you need to write a book. Well, that sounded like a good idea. All they needed was a scribe to pull it all together. Which is why, on a picture-perfect spring day in Virginia, I answered a call from Bob Ross, wondering if I might be interested in writing a biography of the biggest corruption buster in Oklahoma history. Well, I was. And a few weeks after Ross's call, I traveled to Oklahoma City and went to work. Actually, it didn't seem like work, as most of my early research involved talking to Price and other opinion leaders whose collective efforts since the 1960s helped stymie public and commercial corruption, and in the process brought a much needed shine to Oklahoma's tarnished reputation. As I conducted and transcribed their audio taped interviews and made my first forays into books, articles, and archival collections, that felt more like work. I realized that I had stumbled onto a bigger project than I had anticipated. What had begun as a straightforward biography was morphing into a deeper history that had never been explored systematically and comprehensively in book form. Simply put, I was wading into not one, but two narratives. Price's biography, which is historically significant by any standard, and the war with corruption in Oklahoma. All right, well, finally, here's a few discoveries and pointers, and this is where everybody can chime in here in a few minutes, but just a few things I've discovered along this really pretty cool journey that I've been fortunate to travel. You'll understand this. Writing is a cumulative process. For whatever reason, I've always been drawn to literature. I have kind of a checkered resume. I've been a high school teacher. I've worked in journalism, book publishing, corporate communications, university teaching, and now I'm doing this, and education in history, communications, and sociology. And somehow or another, those have all coalesced to give me the confidence and maybe even, well, I guess the ability to pull this off. But it really evolved over a long, long period of time. Really a lifetime of experiences I've been real fortunate to have. Also, routine is key. When I've done the groundwork to write a chapter, I work about the same time, usually always in the morning, maybe early afternoon, always in the same place, right here with all these books behind me. And something that you can't see because it's on the far side of the screen is a picture of the first lady of Oklahoma history. And you won't know her probably, Miss Angie DeBow, the late, but she stares over my shoulder. She literally does. Miss Angie's sitting right over there. And she's wagging her finger at me every time I get off task. I guarantee you, she was a remarkable lady. So here I am in an office with Miss Angie behind me, admonishing me to get it straight. Process, organization, and discipline I found are really important. It's not really about the archetypal, inspiration on a mountaintop. Although I will say I live on Ridgetop Drive, and I am looking out here at Carter Mountain, so maybe there is something to it. But it really isn't so much about that, I don't think, as it is about research, Interviews, those I morph those into timelines. I fashion those into chapter outlines that can run 30 pages, single spaced. I mean, it's ridiculous. Eventually, those will morph into chapters, and then comes the writing and the rewriting and the rewriting and more. So it's really about process and organization. Bill Gates is sort of my hero because of the technology he created that allows me to do this. I mean, I really do exploit word processing technology unashamedly. I mean, this is not about pencils and paper, as I'm sure you well know, but I do exploit the technology to its fullest. Word searching, cutting and pasting, all those things. I set a real low bar to make sure I succeed of 500 words a day when I'm in the writing phase. I always beat it, but that makes me feel good because I beat my lower bar. And I can't really explain this, but for some reason, chapters always come to about 8,000 words. Now, why is that? Corky's looking mystified. I really have no idea. But it seems to be just the natural flow of the thing, so I don't fight it. I just go with it. And another cardinal rule I've mentioned, most writing is rewriting. I'm like, what's the fairy tale? No, it's Odysseus' wife, Penelope, weaves the blanket during the day and unweaves it at night. Sometimes that's what I feel like I'm doing. I go in the morning and say, what was I thinking? So I unweave what I did the day before, try to get 500 words ahead. In terms of business opportunities, I really depend heavily on referrals. And those referrals depend on me getting something done. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship there. I've got a background in book publishing, as I said. That's helped me to establish relationships with OU Press, with the State Historical Society. I have to say, I think it's pretty unusual to get on the other side of the desk. I mean, you go into publishing, you're an editor or you're marketing or some phase of the publishing business, and then they work with writers. I don't think there's that many that cross over the other side. So I've been real fortunate to get to do that. Here's a key. When you're coming up with these contracts, learn to be a little bit of a lawyer. If you don't want to do that or you can't do it, find somebody who can help you. I found, I don't know where you see her, but on the far right-hand corner of my screen is my go-to person for contracts and business deals. That would be Judy. She's helped me a lot. I wouldn't sign a business deal before running it by her. As you can see in the announcement that went up at the very beginning, I know what to do about writer's block. Get on a horse and everything's good with the world. And so I thank my two horses, Haskell and Colfax, for keeping me out of that dark hole. And finally, never, ever underestimate luck. I was at a cowboy competition one day, sitting horseback, and the guy next to me, I don't know what he was talking about that prompted this, but he looks over at me and said, damn, Hightower, I wish I was born lucky instead of pretty. that's always stuck with him, and he wasn't. He might have been lucky, but he certainly wasn't the other. Anyway, that's all I had to say. And take off your mute buttons, and I'll be happy to visit with anybody who wants to. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, Michael. That was wonderful.
Are there any questions for Michael about the business of writing or the histories that he's covered?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you. Michael, you can hear? Okay.
Oh yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
So I have to say, I loved The Pattersons, which I read a number of years ago, and I found it a very, very intriguing novel. And is there a sequel coming out?
There is the one I'm working on now is, I won't go very far into it, but I have started, I get down all these historical rabbit holes and working on contracts. And so I think I have a bit of an opening to start the next one. And it won't exactly be a sequel, but it will be fiction.
Okay. but not a sequel, because you never answered some of the stories, some of the questions of the Pattersons.
I know, it's
And
mysterious.
then you left us all hanging.
Well,
and
hang in there, because I actually, I did at one point start a sequel, kind of picked up where I left off, and then I went down some bank rabbit hole and didn't come back up. But then now I've started something else. It's really entirely.
Okay.
But I
Well,
have
good.
my old friends from Birchwood Bay. I have not forgotten them.
Well, good.
So
Well, I will look.
now that your book is off to the press, or very nearly, or in that process, do you feel like, or are you raring to go into the next project?
You know what? It's both. That one I started really in very late 2018, but through 19 and most of 20, I was working, and you do get invested in the project, and it's a little hard to let it go, honestly.
Mm.
Sort of the curse is, and Bernice, you may have found this in your writing too, but you always want to get it just right. There's always something else you can stick in there. There's always something you can tweak. And then when you're working with a biography, believe me, the guy that I'm writing about, Bill Price, every time I talk to him, he's got another story or somebody he forgot to mention or some legal concept that I have to go look up on some site. But Friday, I put it to rest and sent it off to design, so I can't do anything. And there's a little bit of remorse in letting it go, and now I'm ready to go on the next one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I find that when the book finally comes back printed and you've been over the galleys and you've read it twice and thrice and checked it over, you open it up, flip through, and a typo jumps out at you, or an inelegant sentence jumps out at you.
It's almost like buying a new car. You might as well put a scratch in it right away because you know you're going to get one. So you might as well get it over with. So I know. And that's what, Bill's really concerned about, and he wants to get the legal. And I'm not a lawyer. And this book is full of legal cases and, technicalities and court records. And I got a closet full of deposition transcripts. I got to be really careful. And corruption. Yeah, my farrier asked me one day, he said, you checking your tire, you checking your carburetor every time you drive away from an interview? Because I'm going to make some people mad, and I know some of them who will be.
Right. Yeah. No, that is scary.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
There's the cowboy.
There's a little
So-
bit of
Here.
It's
Armand?
I just out of curiosity, how did you, as an Oklahoman of long history, wind up here in Nelson County, aside from the University of Virginia attendance? Did that bring you to Nelson County?
No, I mean, the truth of the matter is, the first Mrs. Hightower was a Virginian. And I went to graduate of Washington and Lane. How I wound up there is just kind of bizarre. But yeah, I was there in the 70s. So I have history in Virginia. And when the opportunity came up to really make a big life change, which is back in 2000, late 2000, I had a daughter at UVA. She transferred there. She'd been here in UVA all her life, from UVA grads, grandpa and uncle and everybody. So when I decided I wanted to go back to school, that's what I did. I said, I'm going to UVA. So that's what I did. How I wound up in Nelson County is a little bit, that's a rabbit hole. I mean, my life changed so much. It was upside down. I was in a completely new place, getting divorced. So what are you going to do? You buy a horse, right?
Horse.
I mean, that seemed to be a logical thing for me to do, and it all kind of evolved from there. But I've been around the animals. I've come from a ranching family, and worked on other outfits in different places, and that's pretty kind of DNA.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool.
Pat?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First is,
Oh, Pat, you're muted. You press mute.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, can you hear me?
yes.
I know that your family ran a chain of very well-known five-star restaurants, and for many years that the Hightower restaurant was the only five-star restaurant in about a four-state area, correct?
Yeah, it was only one restaurant, but it was, yeah, the cellar. It was in the basement of an office building. It's been in the family forever. And oh, it was elegant. And I was too young to appreciate it when it was in its heyday. But yeah, my dad was you know, he was a Francophile and a connoisseur of fine dining. I mean, why I didn't graduate from high school at 300 pounds, I don't know. But he would test out these recipes, and yeah, that's kind of the way I grew up. Yeah, so that's right.
Mhm.
And I believe that building is called the Hightower Building still.
It is. It is. And my brother office is there and looks after the tenant and makes sure the floors are mopped and all that. But and that was actually named after my grandfather, who I never knew, but his last name was Hightower, and he was a banker from Western Oklahoma.
And then last question, I'm kind of like Kay, who read the Pattersons and so enjoyed it, but it was a lot about the relationship with the Indians as people wanting to take over their lands up there around the lake. Do you feel that there has been some real rapprochement with the Indians, with our Native Americans, in the state of Oklahoma?
Ooh, that's a $64 question. I think so. I mean, that state's a little unusual in that there's really no reservations. I mean, there was, land was divided, individual allotments, and they're really very much assimilated into the population. But some of the tribes have been so successful. I mean, none more so than the Chickasaws. I mean, go to the Chickasaw website sometime. I mean, they have kept their native traditions, their culture. Judy and I have been down there, Sulphur and Ada and all those places. And, they have a very strong, deep pride in their culture, but they've adapted it to the 21st century. It's really interesting to see. I mean, I think there has been a rapprochement, but there's still some real discontinuities. There's still a lot of haves and have-nots. And unfortunately, some of these rural, smaller towns, mainly Indian towns, haven't made a whole lot of progress, I'm afraid.
Hmm.
So I guess, it's a mixed bag. There's a range. Nice cat.
Okay, we're getting a little close up of Whiskers. Are there any other questions?
I don't see it.
Bernice, I'm curious about your
So,
project.
Michael, for you, Michael,
Yeah. Okay.
can you hear me, Michael?
Mhm.
Okay. How long would you say it takes you from the conception of a book to finishing it? A couple of years or?
That's about it. And there's usually overlap. I mean, I may be, done with a manuscript and going through an editing process or something like that when I start another one. So there's really never any downtime.
Right.
I know that the 2-volume history I wrote, I very naively thought I was writing one book. And I think I got to about chapter 20 and said, this is ridiculous. So, I divided that one in two, which meant that I had a first volume to polish and get off to, submit. So while I was going through the process, I was completing what then became the second volume. And
I see.
so, yeah, really, there's not a lot of downtime between them, but probably 2 years is about right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So anybody else have any questions, comments?
There's Pat.
Yeah, I don't mean to be such a hog about the questions, but once we talked about that novel, about that very, very dark chapter in Oklahoma history where citizens of Oklahoma married Indian women in order to take over the oil land.
Yeah.
It sounds like that would continue to be fodder for more writing because that was an unbelievable. What was the name of the book that came out about?
Killers of the Flower Moon. It's behind me here. Yes, for those of you who don't know, written by David Grant. He's a New York writer, but it was primarily in the 1920s in the particular tribe of the Osage, which is Osage County now is a huge, vast, sprawling county up north of Tulsa. But that was the home eventually, after they were removed several times, eventually out of Kansas and into that area. That's where the Osage Nation is and remains today. And they became the wealthiest indigenous people on the face of the earth. But guess what was under the land that nobody thought was good for anything? Oil.
Mhm.
And so, as the those oil fields got developed, they were sitting right underneath, Osage land, and it was just a dread. And I actually worked that into this book on corruption because I go into lots of chapters of nefarious deeds, but that's the biggest one. Oh yeah, and in the if you ever read the book Killers of the Flower Moon, it actually made J. Edgar Hoover's career. It was his first big case to uncover this. And these murders, guys would marry into native families, and the women would mysteriously disappear, and it was all done with the active cooperation of law enforcement, of lawyers, of sheriffs. They all knew what was going on. And it actually has, Judy and I heard Jeff Blackbear. I think he's the chief, I think. Anyway, we've heard him speak. And he said that David Graham, this short New Yorker, was so extraordinary because he was able to win the trust of some of these descendants of these families. They were so horribly affected by this, but he was actually able, winning personality, I don't know what, but he was able to really get the backstory, and a lot of these people are still reluctant to talk about it. Yeah, it created a rift that lasted for generations, you can imagine.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Wow. Well, it's fascinating. Makes me want to go to Oklahoma and learn more.
Well, I'll be glad to have you.
Save you the trip.
I just am so grateful for everyone who came. Lori, it's great to see you. And Joan, your name's on my screen, but I'm not seeing an image. And Tara, it's lovely to see you. So hi. And it's been such a delight to get to know you better, Michael, through your books and your career and background. And
well, you're great to invite this group. I appreciate it. Like I said at the beginning, we're all in this out of some commitment, whether it's dance up in the upper left-hand corner or piano in the middle of my screen, whatever it may be. And I'm fortunate enough to get to represent the letters part of it. And really been pretty doggone lucky to get to do that.
yeah, well, thank you for doing it. And it's been a wonderful discussion. And we are recording it, thanks to Judy for alerting me. I thought we were. So I'll be able to post a link to the video and link to our last meeting. But I just want to edit out some of the dead spaces in it. And of course, without an externally imposed deadline, it's hard to get going on. I will. We'll post that and the history of NSAL. So I've got work to do. But anyway, thank you all so much. And watch for the announcement for our next meeting. So thank you, Paul.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank
Well,
you.
Thank you all so much.
So nice to see everybody after such a long time.
Well, and feel free to stay on and chat because we don't have a time limit on the meetings. Like
Mm,
if anyone just wants to hang out together and talk, feel free.
okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
So Tara, you're back in Charlottesville, it looks like.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. This is a wonderful program, Michael. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's been a good gig, and it's going to keep on going. Have more projects coming down the pike. But thank you for that. Sure.
Mhm. Yeah, very good.
Well, Tara's been involved in a major landscaping project. Is that nearly done?
Yes, if anyone is interested in driveways.
Oh,
So, well,
they are in,
so you've just done the driveway part, or I thought you had a bigger plan?
Well, the garden and exterior steps and
yeah.
Rachel Lilly helped with the design, and it's just beautiful, if you can imagine.
You know, she does beautiful work. She did some work for us. And she
She just walks in and knows what to do.
she does. She knows exactly. And everything that she planted for us has lived, which is a trial by fire at my house. But she seems to know what to plant that will survive. Yeah, she's a delightful person.
She's a very nice person, yeah.
But I know her as Rusty Lily.
Yes.
Right.
Being more formal. You know, I've wrote about her. I did a project for the Smithsonian to archive some of the outstanding gardens in the region. And my most recent project was the Tiverton in Greenwood. And that has a fascinating history. It originally, and well, in the early 90s, it belonged to the owner of Mirador back in the 1800s. And then his daughter had it. It was purchased by the mother of William Boeing of Boeing Aircraft. So, and so that history is interesting at that time. And then the second wife in that family, she, as a widow, hired Charles Gillette to design her garden, and which he did, and then it fell into ruin. And when the current owners, the Capshaws, bought the property, they brought Rusty in, and she and Adam Sutton, an architect, restored the gardens and historic barns, and it's been a major project. But the Gillette Garden is now pretty much back as it was. So that's been fun working with
Catriona, what's the name of the estate?
Tiverton.
Because I believe Rusty did her dissertation on Charles Gillette's work when she
Yeah, she studied under Rainey, who I think was her professor. But yeah, she's probably considered the state, nationally, the expert on Charles Gillette.
Wow.
She had her hip replaced when I started working with her, and she was just walking up and down the grade here, and she's just Energizer Bunny.
Mhm. Yes. She also German Shepherds.
Oh,
We connected right away.
I wrote about her for Virginia Living magazine, and she actually gave me all the her drawings, and they weren't blueprints, but they were to scale drawings of the electricity, the water, her plant designs, the whole complicated work for a major project like that. I was able to scan them at the Library of Virginia in Richmond. And so I was able to include in the submission all the drawings And then they had two blueprints, original blueprints from Charles Gillette. And so I got to hold those in hand, my hot little hands, and
Mhm.
they were too big to go through the scanning machine, which is, I don't know, 5 feet wide, but they were wider than that.
Mm.
Having to photograph them and splice the photos together. But it was a really intriguing project. And I was very grateful for Rusty for sharing her drawing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Well,
Well, this has been lovely. It's been wonderful to see everybody again after
Yeah.
such a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And a great program. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Kay. Good to see you too. Really good.
Good to see you,
Michael.
Kay.
yeah.
I'm going to sign off. My husband has dinner ready for me.
Okay. Good to see you.
Mine doesn't.
I just had to brag about that a little bit. You know.
My husband does that too.
Very good. These men are trainable, aren't they?
Yes.
Not entirely. A little mystery in there.
Get my
Good.
message.
Yeah. Tara, it was nice to see you. And nice to see everybody else. Take care.
So long, Kay. Good to see you.
Bye-bye. Take
Bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
So, Judy, did you get my phone message about the strategic planning future?
Yes,
Yes. Would you be willing to?
let me put some thought to that to find out what it is exactly you're asking for.
Well, for a start, Pat has agreed to be at one meeting. We'll do a Zoom meeting. So if you'd be willing to commit to just that and then see where you are, that would at least then we could get going. Peter's agreed to serve, and Jim will serve,
Mhm.
and Pat's made a commitment to add that she's not going to take a deep dive into any big project.
Right.
And I don't think any of us are keen for a huge project. So if we can just sort of come up with a vision, that would be,
And see where everything's going.
just a vision. Yeah.
Mhm.
Pat, do you have anything to say with that? You're on mute right now. Unmute yourself. Yeah, yeah. Pat, I think you're frozen. You unmute yourself. Can I unmute you? I'm asking you to unmute Pat.
Okay, unmute.
Good. Yeah. I'm glad it's worked out to just three of us, not to do the meeting now, but just to,
No,
and Rosalind will be participating.
I've just had a dinner guest arrive from Atlanta. She just flew in this afternoon and Ed went upstairs to greet her. My husband does not fix dinner, unfortunately. So I've got to go. But Catriona, one thing I've suggested to you before, it would be a good idea if you would join the Wednesday Music Club just to get to know some of these folks. It's such a big membership. I'm also thinking it would be good for you to plug into what Charlottesville Opera is doing. They've got this dynamite new general director, Christine DeMaria, and I can envision her doing a Zoom program possibly for us. Also, they have an artist in residence who was the lead in the last 7 musicals, and she is dynamite also. So I think if you could get to know some of these people, it would be very helpful. Do you not agree, Judy?
I agree.
Yeah.
I do agree.
Get to know the community a little bit more now that you are thinking about spending your life here in Charlottesville more than at the lake. Seriously.
Yeah.
And I think to develop some relationships there would be really terrific.
That makes good sense.
So I'm going to go cook dinner, but
Of course, yeah.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
join you for that planning meeting.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought it was great, Judy.
Yeah.
really great. I'm so glad you recorded it because I will send it to all the people that
Yeah.
Yeah. I
had
don't know
sent
what happened. I need Jim to hold my hand when I do these things. I tried to do it independently, obviously.
I
That
understand it. So it worked and I got on and Michael was terrific as usual.
Good to see you,
Bye.
Pat. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
So, well, Judy, would you be willing to do at least one Zoom,
Yes, one to just to see what the plan is and to do that. And when are you thinking?
Well, I'll send out a doodle poll and it would be you and Pat and myself, Rosalind, Peter, and Jim.
Okay.
Jim had done a independent assessment of NSAL back in 2012.
Right.
And during that time, he has a good grasp of the history of the organization as an
Mhm.
international. And he's, I've been a member since 1983. So he's lived it and he loves NSAL. But,
Yeah.
our chapter, as you know, is really in pretty dire straits. I mean, they had a lot of letters of resignation. Some because our meetings are on Sundays and they want to go beagling and
Mhm.
Reasons of priorities and whatnot. But
Mhm.
the sending $40 a head to national when we've at this point got maybe 20 members signed up.
Mhm.
We don't even have enough to cover our competition without.
Right.
Any rate, so we need to just think about what makes sense.
Okay, so it's Peter and Rosalind, Jim, Pat's going to be on for one, and yourself and
And who else was it? Jim and me, you, Pat, Rosalind, Peter. I think that's it. So I wanted to keep it small, so that it's sort of a
and yes, just I will definitely just to see what
yes, I
the
understand.
plan is.
I'm not going
But
to tie your feet to the fire, hold your feet to the fire to be in it permanently if that's not what you want.
Okay. Well, this all worked out very nice today. Thank you very much.
Well, Michael was just wonderful, and I'll send him an email. But please do thank him.
Yeah, he enjoyed it, I know. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.